right, good morning, everyone. Good morning, fellow game developers and all the students, indie developers, media, press, everybody. Hi. I'd like you to please silence your cell phones or put them to vibrate mode before we get started, because I've got some cool audio and it would really suck to hear like a ringtone in the middle of that. All right. As you all may have guessed, my name's Linnea, and I'm a lead artist at DICE. During Battlefield 4, I worked as a world builder on the multiplayer portion of our game. And today, I want to share some behind the scenes, just a quick look into the making of Battlefield. So today, I'm going to go over the approach that we had to the entire game, our art direction through various disciplines, such as animation, characters, VFX. You guys can read. I'm also going to go through some of our tech that we upgraded, which gave us better destruction, levolution. And a really big feature this time was our synced water and weather systems. I'm going to talk a bit about how we worked with those and what it was like to change tech partway through a project. So during Battlefield 4, or approaching that project, we had several challenges. As some of you may have known, Battlefield is a very old franchise as far as the industry is concerned. We have a lot of titles that have been out. This is the 14th Battlefield, not including canceled projects and expansion packs. There was also a feeling from the consumer base and from ourselves that the FPS market was a little bit flooded. I don't know if any of you guys felt that way. How many of you play first-person shooters? How many of you play Battlefield, actually? OK, great. You guys will know exactly what I'm talking about then. We also had a changing audience base. So a lot of people that had started playing Battlefield way back in the day with Vietnam, 1942, and even people that had started playing with Bad Company, were suddenly noticing that they're getting older, more mature. So we decided that our game should also become a little bit more mature. But we still also had a lot of new players coming in, new players that had never played Battlefield before, so we wanted to make sure that we catered to them as well. We're also facing a new console generation. When we released, we were one of the first games to release on Gen 4. So we released on 5 consoles, 6 if you count low-end and Ultra PC as different consoles, which we did, but it was a bit of a headache. Worth it, though, I think. So we had some goals that we set up in the beginning when we realized we had these challenges. We wanted more destruction. Who doesn't want more destruction? Destruction is cool. We wanted to listen to our players. We want to make sure that they felt like they were heard, like what they were suggesting, what they wanted, made it into the game, or at least that we were trying. We wanted to improve in quality and innovation. Of course, that's like obvious stuff. Who wouldn't want to get better at quality and innovation? And we also wanted no crunch. Yeah, good luck. But we wanted no crunch, so that was our goal. We had to have a goal in order to make some progress in that direction. So instead of having more destruction, we decided to have smarter destruction, because we couldn't really add more. The animations require a lot of dynamic parts, and a lot of our performance would suffer. And of course, we wanted to try to hit 60 FPS on next-gen and Ultra PC. So instead, we decided to focus our efforts where it mattered, in changing the gameplay with destruction, on the big stuff that players felt more, rather than the small aesthetic things that just ate up performance and didn't really add much to the feeling of the game. Like I said, we wanted to listen to our players, so that meant that we wanted to listen to both our core players and also our new players. This is how we ended up creating the multiplayer playground level, and a lot of other smaller things. But that's a good example where we were listening to a lot of our core players. You know, they know how to fly a jet, they know how to fly a helicopter. But if you're a new player coming into a multiplayer game and you jump in a helicopter and you're not very good at it, people yell at you to say, noob, get off the servers, you know, uninstall, and very mean things that I'm not going to repeat here. So we wanted to give players a space where they could test drive a bunch of these vehicles, a lot of weapons, test out different ranges, how they felt, test destruction, test our water gameplay. before they got into a match so that they would know what they were doing and feel less intimidated by all this peer pressure. And when it came to quality and innovation, we realized that it was a bit of a balance between the two. Because if you want to create quality in an area, you really need to spend a lot of time polishing your techniques, training yourselves in those areas. But if you want to innovate, then you're creating new stuff. So you don't really have as much time to get the high level of quality that DICE is well known for. So we decided to have a bit of a balance between the two. We still wanted to push boundaries, and so we had different trade-offs between polishing certain areas like battle log, and that had to compete with adding elements like commander mode. Now, we took a lot of these ideas, and a lot of them we haven't given up on, so we have continued support throughout the game, and with our DLC packs, that's going to continue adding features and polishing on segments that we weren't managing to hit during our regular production. And of course, crunch always happens when you have developers who are passionate about what they make and are invested in it becoming great. And when eventually during production we agree to a release date, we really don't want to upset the players and ourselves by pushing that and continuously pushing that. So we decided we're going to ship at a certain date, and some of us really wanted to get our features that extra mile better. So we spent a little bit of extra hours, but our studio was really great with encouraging healthier options, working out time off. They encouraged vacation and spending time with the family. So I don't think there were many people at our studio that had families that really were spending many more extra hours. So I wanted to go over some key areas that we focused on with our art direction throughout the entirety of Battlefield 4. Because there are so many different components, we wanted to have some common threads working their way through our entire game. This was for both multiplayer and single player, but also for different areas such as characters, animations, VFX, audio. So I'll go through each of those a bit. Human was the first area we wanted to improve in. We wanted everything to feel more human, more relatable. So we added new tech like blend shapes, scanning techniques, new eye shaders to the characters. Our animated characters should become aware of the player and have an egocentric system so that you felt like they reacted to you being there, not just standing there like a pillar. The effects should pull the player into the world. Audio should sound more human and be more human in their movement and interactions. And the music, we decided, will also be a bit more organic and human in its feeling and tone, less dubsteppy than last time. So here's an example from Battlefield 3. What we were trying to get away from were these moments of uncanny valley that really pull you out of the immersion of the game. As you can see, these are moments where we're trying to convey a very strong emotion, but the player isn't getting that because they're being hit with this really creepy-looking guy. So we focused a lot on our characters, creating unique and interesting characters. This is Hannah, for those of you who have seen our trailer or played our single player. And we wanted to give them a sense of realism and not have them be too exaggerated in any way. We believe that real characters are the most interesting because they are the most relatable. We wanted to make sure that we had human animations and effects to convey emotion, as I said, without entering the uncanny valley. And I think we got a lot closer with this game. We also wanted to improve in the area of drama, being more dramatic with our storytelling, our effects, and our audio. We wanted to focus, again, on the player so that the player feels more rewarded and recognized for what they're doing. And we also wanted to add this feeling of importance and drama to the player's actions. So here's an example of one of the references that we were looking at for our single-player airfield level. We didn't want to tell small stories, like, a can by the side of the street. The story was some guy littered. That's not very exciting. We wanted to tell entire environment stories, which would convey one big incident, and that we wanted that to have an emotional impact. So for instance, this is probably people evacuating for some reason, maybe a hurricane. And that made it into this part of our single player, where we use this reference as a gameplay wall, not allowing the player to move beyond the support of his squad.
To the north, on the other side of that highway.
Also, we had a lot of over-the-top destruction, which is always fun.
I think that's our gate through the city. You got a point, Rector.
So you can see how when you approach that wall, there's some sort of story. These people had evacuated the city, and what we were trying to tell was that it was under siege. There was a big war going on, and an EMP had gone off, so everybody abandoned their cars while they were leaving, and it had left this big backup. So we had to obviously run a tank over it to get through. That's the best option. So we approached environmental storytelling in a fairly obvious way. This is a fence that I put in our level very quickly to show a point. This fence communicates to the player, this place is fenced off, don't go here. But how do we take that to the next level? What if they're really explorative? Well, we could add an electrical box with a sign that indicates that there's some danger, don't approach this. We could take it a step further, adding effects and audio, something buzzing. There are effects from an electrical circuit. So maybe this fence is electrified, so you touch it, you get hurt. We could go over the top with this and tell a little bit more of the story. But that was a little bit further than we wanted to go. So we decided to pull it back to about this level of storytelling for us. And this helps communicate expectations to the player so that they're not met with something that doesn't make sense to them. We wanted really clear and obvious rules in our world. We wanted our effects, as I said, to create more drama for the player, and that was in having a lot of atmospheric stuff, like dense air, mist, fog, ambient smoke, a lot of dynamic effects that help the scene come alive. So here you'll see a clip of that level without effects, and then with effects. And you can see that it makes quite a bit of a difference to how you feel, even though you still have the camera shake and you still have some shader effects. You're not getting the full impact emotionally of having all those effects battering you to the side and making you feel very helpless and alone. Audio is also a very strong tool for creating drama on a conscious as well as a subconscious level. And our audio team, which has won tons of awards, wanted to make sure that this new game also maintained that level for quality that we were well known for. We thought that audio created an environmental ambience that was like an emotional cushion for the player to sit on. Wherever there were things that might pull the player out of the experience, the audio can pull them back in. So this video clip is about our gunfire, so it's a little bit loud. But it's reference footage taken from a training drill, not in a war zone. So hopefully you can see what we were going for. So as you can see, the pattern is really easy to discern here in the firing, which kind of makes it feel more like AI, more robotic. Here's the reference we were looking at. So a lot of single fire shots, you'll notice. And then when they fire on automatic or semi-automatic, they have a bit longer bursts. They're less predictable. But a lot more single fire bursts at very odd intervals. And then here's how we implemented that in our test range. So those of you that don't work in audio, this may seem like a really subtle difference. But when you're playing the game and you hear all these ambient sounds that fit into the world that you're in, it just helps to create this illusion, this bubble of immersion for the player. That being said, we also wanted to improve in the area of believability. This meant refocusing on infrastructure, how our spaces felt, the effects, and again, the animation. We believe infrastructure is extremely important to giving a space a sense of structure and believability. It needs structure and infrastructure for it to function in real life. So subconsciously, we expect these things when we go through spaces. Things like road signs, traffic lights, sidewalk transitions. You can see here between the road and the sidewalk, we have like a little white decal and then a darker patch and then the actual curb and then another darker patch of tiles leading to a bit of a faded transition into the texture. And even though that's a lot of transitional pieces, they're all clustered right at the edge to help you believe this transition between surfaces. The same goes for our spaces. We didn't want to simplify our spaces. We wanted to capture what was believable. Instead of specifically replicating things, which was extremely time-consuming, and instead of just saying, here's a Google image, make that, that was a little bit silly. We wanted to capture what was believable, the transitions between surfaces, the material properties, especially here in such a very wet and specular world. You can see, especially on the Vespa down there, it has a really nice sort of specular highlight that really sells that that's a wet metallic object right now. In the real world, no object is just snapped to the ground or auto-rotated 45 degrees. So we really tried to avoid that in our spaces. Even from a very early implementation standpoint from design, we wanted to avoid that. Trees are always slightly slanted. They follow the contour of the landscape. Man-made things also have imperfections. So we didn't want any razor-sharp edges on our buildings or any of our models. So we decided that it was important to respect the surfaces of where our objects were placed. What is the material that they're on? Is it placed on a slope? Is the ground soft or hard? Take your time to look at these things and understand why things grow the way they do or why they're placed the way they do, and your worlds will become so much more believable. The same goes for when you're approaching it from, say, a design standpoint. Here's the problem. I need 3 pieces of cover. But it starts to look a bit unrealistic. And if you start from this point, it's a bit hard to fix when you're later on down the road. So from the beginning, we wanted to make sure that we had an organic feel to how the rocks were placed, how cover was placed, working with the landscape and the terrain rather than just relying on objects. We wanted to rotate and add variation. And then use foliage as a way to ground objects. Where does the grass grow? You could take this even further and say, well, the grass usually grows on the sunny side of the rock, not on the shadowed side. So whatever is east in your map would have a little bit more grass, and the other side of the rock would have more twigs and leaves and stuff that is built up and not necessarily been grown over with vegetation. We also wanted more believable animation, and because we use a lot of mocap with hand-tweaked positions to get this sort of hyper-realism in animation, we wanted to make sure that the characters felt connected to the world, because it's really easy for them to feel disconnected when they're standing there in their idle loop, just kind of floating a bit. So we used this by having additional props that they interacted with, by having them sit in chairs, hold coffee cups, pick things up, put them down, which added a lot of believability to them. So focus on that in this scene. It may be a little bit of an extreme example, but notice how they're interacting with the objects, and it helps their movements be more believable.
Why are y'all still around?
Short version, ma'am, we are caught behind enemy lines.
We wish to get back to our ship.
If wishes were horses, you beggars would ride.
The USS Valkyrie, likely in the Red Sea by now.
Oh, fuck me. Did you fall off? Where's my coffee?
Ma'am, it is imperative that we find transport west.
Russians rolled into our airfield 3 days ago. More ground forces are closing in. Our supply lines are cut off. We're outnumbered 12-1, so whatever your imperative is, it's unfortunately not mine. Put that down. This stuff's pure devastation.
Of course, Irish is always touching explosives, always getting into trouble. We wanted the same in terms of our audio. The level of consistency should be really high. So we developed this technique of comparing our audio to real-world reference that we found. Again, this is the same piece of reference from earlier, or well, it's the same group from a military training reference. We wanted it to feel very real and documentary rather than Hollywood and over the top. And this was achieved through constant comparison of carefully chosen real reference material. By analyzing and deconstructing well-chosen big pictures and letting that define all of the aspects of the building blocks rather than the other way around, we made sure that all the assets could fit into the same image at the same time. So that way your grenade being thrown and hitting a wall wouldn't sound incredibly different from, you know, one in the real world. And the same with, you know, rapid fire or single shot fire of various guns. They wouldn't feel like this is from a sci-fi game or from a fantasy game. Which, why would they have guns in a fantasy game? I'm not sure. But this is an example. So here's the raw footage from the actual reference. And here's the same reference, but with Battlefield 4 audio assets that we were working on. So as you can see, they're a bit heavier, but they still fit.
That's hitting the fucking corner right there. That's hitting the fucking corner right there.
So as you can see, it works fairly well as a tool for comparing your audio. And I recommend it for anyone that's trying to follow a piece of reference, be it a film or a TV show or a cartoon or something, to compare your audio if you're trying to replicate a certain type of sound or feel. Here's a quick example from Battlefield 4. This is our single-player trailer, for those of you that haven't seen it. We wanted all of the elements in this to come together to form a cohesive emotional experience, telling a story through conveying an emotion. And the emotion that we have in this trailer and in the game arcs from a point of difficulty to loss and desperation, and then determination, because they're caught behind enemy lines. They're all alone. They don't have the resources of their entire army.
You boys are late. Takes time to shoot your way through a search party. What do
You can see the effects there having a big emotional impact with the EMP field.
For a billion people. You do not give Admiral Chang any more reason to be upset about the fleet of warships we got stationed right off his coast. No room for mistakes, boys.
The four of us against an army? What are you, crazy?
We need everyone alive and combat ready.
I don't trust her. She's hiding something. You keep an eye on her.
What is your problem? You don't like having a woman in your squad?
I don't have a problem with women. I got a problem with liars! Everybody on board now!
It's too dangerous!
We are not going to leave you behind! No one gets left behind!
And of course, more destruction.
Warriors on the Valkyrie. I know we're tired. All of us have suffered. Lost friends, loved ones. We will ensure it was not in vain. We may be the only ship left. Not go down without a fight. Strike with speed and courage. Let this storm carry us home.
What's your mission this shit, huh?
Stick together, we won't die.
I think we just invaded China.
Of course, our very well-known Battlefield theme music. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Frostbite 3 and what that was like to work with some of the new tech elements that we had coming into the game, which were very exciting. But also it required us to learn how to use new technology and how to work with that, adapt our content to that. It was really great to get updates and new tech during production, but it had some drawbacks. integration, growing pains, and like I said, redoing content. So our planning had to include a lot of padding to account for this. Sometimes new tech can come at a cost. As I said, rebuilding content was not always happy. So we needed to create shaders with dynamic and reactive properties to the world that were not overly heavy and bloated. That was tough, because as an artist, you always want to throw in just that extra little blend or that extra little fade, but all the extra math really adds up here. And the same applied for our vegetation and our meshes. They had to look really good skinned when they were just normal and in a plain, sunny, windless day. But they also had to look good when they were pulled to the extremes of their rig and pushed when in a really windy environment. So we tried to use the same assets as much as possible instead of building unique ones for every single scenario. But when it comes together, it's really worth it. And here's a quick clip from our Frostbite team on some of the features that we got for Battlefield 4 from Frostbite 3. And it's going to play any minute. There we go.
We spent significant effort on creating more dynamic and living environments.
Before, they would have to go to a lot of work to make a tree feel like it swayed in the wind. Now we give them the tools to create the tree, and we let the game engine control how the wind affects that tree.
Frostbite allows everything to work together. The waves on the beach, the wind blowing the white caps, even the clouds overhead all move consistently with the forces of nature.
You might see an explosion go off, you'll see the trees nearby shake from the explosion.
It's sort of subtle, but it creates this sense of seamless reality. So the large world coupled with a lot of people running around interacting with you really pays off in Battlefield 4.
Destruction has always been a core feature of the Frostbite engine.
It's the evolution of the way the environment is impacted by gameplay. Everything from the smallest spark colliding, but also gigantic chunks of debris that crumble when they impact the ground.
The guys on Battlefield 4 have been working on something called Levolution.
Levolution is really about the concept how you can drastically change a multiplayer map into something different. It could be anything from a big building collapsing or to a dam breaking or anything really big game changer to the level.
A recent feature that we've put in, and you'll see in Battlefield 4, is our networked water simulation. So what this means is all players will see the same wave in the same position at the same time. And this leads to some pretty exciting cat and mouse type of gameplay where you're ducking down and going up and you can kind of peek around as you drive in your boat.
It will no longer swim on a flat surface. Instead, it will be affected by the different waves and everything. And that comes to everything from living characters that are swimming, but also to the ragdolls.
Something like a jet crashes into the ocean, you'll see the water react and the debris will then float.
So as you can see, we had a lot of new features that came in with Frostbite 3. And this was happening during production. So it's not like we started a few years before Battlefield 4 released and we had all that great tech. Obviously, new tech takes time to develop, and we came up with ideas as we were in pre-pro. So asking for stuff and getting that back was a really great resource. And it was really worth it in the end to get this new tech and to rebuild our content, because I think it created a much more solid game in the end. I want to talk quickly about our destruction, because that's such a big feature in Battlefield, something we're very well known for. Our goals with Battlefield 4 were to create the feeling of a fully dynamic and physical world that you can interact with. Things respond the way they should. If you kick a chair, it'll fall over. If you throw a grenade at a wall, if it isn't like super reinforced steel, you know, it'll take some damage. It'll show that destruction. We wanted to deliver a destruction experience that is visually and sonically mind-blowing, which means that it was both audibly mind-blowing, but Sonic approves. And we realized that since we can't have destruction on all of our objects, just for practical performance reasons, we needed to have a crystal clear visual language to the player that described what was destructible and what wasn't, so that subconsciously, even if they weren't aware of it, they would know that, well, obviously this wall is destructible and that one isn't, so they wouldn't just launch RPGs at walls and be really disappointed when they didn't get destroyed. We also used a good visual language throughout the rest of our game. Obviously, if it's red, it'll blow up. It's a classic. We also had yellow pipes that had poison gas, and I think blue had water, and some other sort of iconic like flashing lights for things that you could interact with. So we had different types of destruction in Battlefield 4 that we worked with. The first one was micro-destruction. This is when small arms fire chips off parts of an asset. This generally consists of smaller pieces and a ruin state for the explosion destruction. It allows vehicles to move over small objects without problems at the very end when you have a ruin state. And it communicates to the player that this asset is completely destroyed. So you'll see when I play this clip that I'll blow up parts of this, or I'll shoot parts of this asset. But there's always a bit of a ruin left at the bottom, so that there was still something there. Micro-destruction mostly is aesthetic and adds to an overall feeling of pressure. Let's say you're taking cover behind something that's like crouch cover height, and pieces are getting chipped off and flying in your face. It adds this sense of importance and drama and anxiety. But it doesn't really add large gameplay changes or memorable events, and it is the most expensive of all of our types of destruction. So we only use it in areas where the player is going to take frequent cover, such as around high populated capture points. So as you can see, there are various parts of the object, and those have health states. So when I shoot that and it takes damage, it'll be replaced with these cluster effects. We also had macro destruction, which is larger damage to holes, like holes in walls. This allows players to create new routes and increase visibility throughout the level for all those super evil snipers out there.
I was running from a tank, and I dived through the window after knifing it. It misses me and blows a hole through the wall in front of me. Then I run to the next door, and then it tries to hit me again and blows a wall through the store in front of me. So I'm just keep running through the holes it's blowing, but while still trying to hit me directly. It was unbelievable.
Maybe a bit of an extreme example, but definitely has happened to me sometimes in the game. And then we have building destruction. We have structures that collapse after a certain amount of player-induced damage. Players usually are killed if they're caught inside this collapse. And these collapses are meant to change the gameplay area and the routes in a larger way. So let's say you had a two-story building, but then it collapses. You might still have some cover underneath on one side, but you can now like run over the top or around. And I apologize in advance for the frame rate. I was running like 4 versions of the game at the same time when I was capturing this. And as you will see, I was also running Skype. I asked you guys to turn your cell phones off, but then I couldn't turn Skype off. It's hypocrisy. And then we also have our cinematic destruction, which is what everyone recognizes and remembers from our trailers and also from our levels. It's the most memorable, and it's always linked to the theme of the level. We try to make these spectacular with big animations, and we want them to change the way the level is played the most. So for instance, the skyscraper in Siege of Shanghai, when that comes down, it changes to a different gameplay area for the main middle base. And the same on, I think it's called Flood Zone. You can break a dam, and it raises the entire water level in the city. So instead of using vehicles, you now use water vehicles. So those are always big and over the top. Who doesn't like a little bit of big and over the top? I know I do. So as I mentioned earlier, we needed to be really smart with the placement of our destruction. We couldn't just put it everywhere, and we couldn't just put the most expensive stuff in places people wouldn't see it, because that's not smart. We wanted a higher density of destructible props at points that were likely to be contested and highly populated. So usually around our C base, but then we also had some at all of our other bases. But we usually wouldn't put it like on the edges of the city where no one is likely to go. The same principle applies to more interesting areas and iconic objects in our level as well. The more expensive or costly they are, we tend to put them in the middle where people will get to see them. Because who wants to work on a really pretty object and then no one gets to see it? That wouldn't be fun. So this is Siege of Shanghai. The left side is a spawn base and the right side is a spawn base, and the tower in the middle is the middle base. And as you can see, we took that principle to the extreme here, where the middle base is the giant Levolution destructible building that falls down. But there's also a higher density of micro-destruction props there, and macro-destruction cascades out to the other bases as well. That way players feel like they're getting some kind of cool interactability with the environment, that it is physical, that it does respond to what you're doing. I want to talk quickly about Levolution, because that was a new feature that we introduced in Battlefield. And really, it's just a way for the level to respond to the player, to evolve dynamically as you're playing. The changes are either passive or active, storytelling and cosmetic, or tactical with destruction or level-changing features. They're not always destruction. It could be like, you'll see there, the raising of the shutters. When we were first testing a lot of our Levolution features, however, we noticed that not a lot of people realized they were there. And when they were triggered or something did happen, not a lot of people knew that it happened. So we decided, after doing some testing, to approach it by informing the player, making them aware of what exists by using mechanics and techniques that are familiar to gamers. Like I said, flashing lights, different materials, the red barrel that explodes. We use this sort of interaction language to help inform the player of what's available and what has happened. We also needed to, we said crank it to 11, but we need to make sure the player feels the event and notices when something has changed so that they're not confused when they come back and suddenly the area is very different. So we have audio, we have VFX. When you're closer to an event but you're not really looking at it, sometimes you'll have a little screen effect. The most notable of this is probably after the skyscraper comes down on that level, Siege of Shanghai. There's a shader that gets placed on all the objects. It passes around. There's effects that go through the street. And then a dust shader that settles on all of the objects so that even if you spawn into the level after this has happened, you know the skyscraper is down. So that way, you're not grabbing a sniper role, you're grabbing a tank to go annihilate people at point C. We also wanted to add a bang and maximize the potential and emotional impact of all this, which is why we added a big spectacle to everything, lots of effects over the top. So the goal with Levolution was to add new elements without removing focus from our core Battlefield experience. And it made a lot of changes throughout the way. We realized very early on that sometimes the easiest Levolution features to implement, like bollards raising up to stop traffic, often had the biggest effect on gameplay. So we asked the entire studio to come up with ideas for what Levolution features they would like to see, what kind of interactable stuff in the level they would like to see. And that generated a ton of ideas that we sifted through, and it helped create the most effective mechanics to put effort and time into. Our Levolution pod is a good example of cross-disciplinary work in the industry, and we're very excited that they did well in that. It demanded a lot of constant testing, but also a really great technical understanding, a willingness to take on challenges, and it also needed a sense of imagination, which is probably one of the things that most of us love about working in the games industry. Being able to use the process of rapid iteration, the Levolution team was able to prototype, rule out, redo, refine, and polish a lot of concepts from ideation to implementation. I'm just going to show a quick video where our producer is talking about some Levolution features.
It can be anything, like creating all new paths to get the upper hand in the fight. Raise bollards to stop vehicles. Fortify your position by activating the shutter gate. Or how about trapping your enemy with one of your hand grenades?
That one's my favorite.
Metal detectors will give you position away. And car alarms can really screw up your knife game. disorient your enemies by using the environment to gain a tactical advantage. Then there's the ambient changes that will drastically alter the look and feel of the map during the course of the battle. Finally, you can trigger massive game-changing events. You can flood an entire city, changing the tide of the battle. Levolution is a game changer. It's a big focus for us as we take the dynamics of Battlefield to a whole new level.
Pretty fun. I like it. Now I go back and play other FPSs and I'm like, why can't I interact with everything? I also wanted to talk about our water and weather system. As you guys saw in the Frostbite video, we have a new server-synced water simulation system that allows all of our players to see the same waves at the same time. We ended up using an approach that we call our visual target for a lot of this. Because we have so much content over so many maps, we wanted to create a base set of assets that could be used everywhere that would react to whatever environment they were put in. So we had a woodland visual target with trees that were properly skinned and looked good, with foliage, with terrain shaders, with water shaders that could be used on all of those environments throughout the game. The same went for our ocean and beach theme, our islands, and our interior and our snowy sort of environments. So we had these visual targets, and then world builders or designers could go in, grab those shaders, grab those assets, and they would automatically work together in a scene. And then when you added wind or you wanted to change the weather of the level, they would react and they would look good under those conditions. Like I said, this demanded that a lot of our content was very flexible. And that was probably one of the harder things to do, was go back and make shaders that would look good when the water was completely placid, but then would froth up and get a little darker and look still solid like good water when it became a lot more stormy. I wanted to show you guys our visual target for the woodland environment, just so you get an idea. And this was really early on in production, so some of the assets got updated, but you'll still see kind of how we created that. So as you can see, we have around maybe 4 or 5 different terrain shaders here, different scattered meshes on the ground, such as leaves or twigs, grass on the other side. We have bushes, we have small sapling trees, we have larger trees. And plenty of lens flares. We had to make sure that a lot of our assets, like rocks that were being used for level design quite frequently, were very solid, so that from early on we were getting good content into our levels, so that we didn't have to go back in and replace it with new content later on. Also, it was really relaxing after being in a playtest with a bunch of gunfire to just drop into one of our visual targets and have that nice calm music. So I wanted to say a big thank you to all of you at GDC, all of you who play our game, everybody that supports us in the community. Big thank you from the multiplayer team and also from the rest of the Battlefield 4 development team. I also want to extend a huge thank you to the GDC board for organizing this event, and the technicians who keep everything running smoothly, and the conference associates. We couldn't do any of this without you guys, so please warm Round of applause. And now I'd like to open it up to questions. If you don't want to come up to one of the microphones here in the room, you can feel free to tweet me or email me or come see me afterwards. There are no other talks in this room afterwards, so we're not going to be moving to the wrap-up room. We're just going to be staying here and taking questions for a little bit. Yes?
How long would you typically spend on the daytime and nighttime levels just on lighting?
We could spend up to 2 months on a level, but more often, because of our production timeline and the schedule, we'd end up spending about 2 weeks, 3 weeks per level. But ideally, and some levels got much more love than others, obviously. And we were able to replicate the same sort of lighting in certain areas. We were able to reuse a lot of stuff. But yeah, I would say the shortest amount of time is 2 weeks. The longest is a couple months.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? Questions? I think we have one over here. No? Okay. Here in the middle.
Yeah. So, Seizure of Shanghai, whatever that map is called. What's stopping us from making every single building as destructible as the point C1, and in a dynamic way, so it's not like the canned animations, but completely dynamic and destructible environments?
Well, for us, that's mostly a question of performance. Obviously, our maps are pretty darn big, so we have a lot of stuff on our maps, and the only way that we're able to do out the level so that you don't see the entire level at once. And having having everything be destructible would mean that we would have to create a level that could run when you'd see everything, when it was completely flat. And that would not be the prettiest content. That would be pretty ugly. Yeah, so that's usually the reason why. We want to balance our level of quality with the amount of destruction and gameplay that we have, which is why we focused on, of course, placing the destruction in a smarter way so that it felt like you were still affecting everything without actually just flattening the entire gameplay field. Yes?
So I really liked how Levolution kind of gave an environmental storytelling kind of feel. So I just want to know what was the defining moment for you where you were playing the game and you're like, wow, that was awesome. I didn't know I could do that. Was there a moment when you were developing the game that you're like, wow, this is worth it now?
For me, it was probably when, I think it would be the bollards, actually. We have, on Siege of Shanghai, there's 2 bridges that go to the main base, and both of those bridges have bollards that you can raise and lower. And I was in one game where we had captured the middle point, and we didn't want it to be contested, so we raised the bollards on both sides so that tanks couldn't get through, and it was insanely effective. And it was right after we had implemented those in a playtest. This was the first time that we had those, and I was like, ha! Try to take my base now, bitches. And they couldn't, and it was awesome. So that was probably the moment for me. And then also, during our beta, which we opened up for everyone, seeing people use Levolution way more than we had in playtests, because obviously we're sitting there and we know everything that exists, but the players are experiencing it for the first time. So they're running into the train cars and trapping people, whole squads would just spawn. Some people actually had spawners inside the train cars, and they would just lob grenades and shut them off in there, which was pretty evil. And a lot of people used some of our elevators and stuff with the skyscraper to very devious means. But it was really fun to see the players kind of take ownership of the map, because ultimately what the players do in a Battlefield map is always way more than we ever expect them to. Yeah.
Hi. How do you go about creating the maps? Are you guys working in binomes, the designer and an artist working together, or is it more of the designer does his thing and then an artist comes in and makes it beautiful?
It really depends. We have this role that we implemented for I think it was Battlefield 3, but we really used in Battlefield 4 called a world builder, which combines a designer and a level artist into one person, somebody that spreads both disciplines. We still have specialists that are really great at level design and people that are really great at level art, but we try to combine those into the world builder role, someone that can understand where design is coming from, but it can also, look through the lens of art. So usually we would start, obviously, with a really early gray box stage, and it would look, no offense, it would look designery. And we would then start to polish that as we felt more secure in the bases and didn't want to change any large elements. But again, having a sandbox feel to our levels, where a lot of it is based on terrain and organic elements, helps us change things around when we're playtesting and noticing that things are different, which is, again, why we created this visual target with assets and textures and stuff that was up to our bar of visual quality, so that when we pulled everything together, as a designer, you would say, I need cover over here, but they'd make it look good because the assets and everything were final. Any other questions? Yeah. Hi.
Hello. How many people are involved in development of your project? Because it's very complex art, very complex system.
That's a good question.
Maybe 1,000?
I wouldn't say 1,000. It was a fairly large team for such a big project, I think. As you can see here, this is our multiplayer team. This is not including, I think it was like 6 or 7 engineers that we had, and a couple, like a producer and stuff like that. So there's maybe like 10 people in this picture that are not pictured. So our multiplayer team was not fairly over the top big, I would say, depending on if you look at the number of levels that we created. But the overall team, if you count like marketing, everybody that pulled off and had our launch readiness, all the QA involved in testing, and a lot of the management for that, I think the team was a little over 100, probably less than 200. I don't really know exactly, because we had a lot of people here helping out with the marketing and the launch of the game as well, that I wasn't really directly involved with. Any other questions? All right, well, I will be hanging out here if anyone wants to come talk to me. Thank you all for coming.